All right, well, it is officially 12:05. I know we still have some people coming in, but we only have an hour, so we want to go ahead and dive into this so we make sure we have enough time. So good afternoon and welcome everyone. I'm Jamia Kinsey Singleton. I am the chair of the D&I committee and president-elect for PRSA New Jersey. And we just want to take the time to thank all of you for taking the time out to attend today's webinar on privilege in the workplace. We are excited to bring this series of Lunch and Learn webinars on courageous conversations that will help put diversity and inclusion into action. As a result of the recent events that we've all known that have taken place throughout our country over the last few months, we've seen that companies, organizations, and individuals have really started to take a deeper dive and look into D&I. The goal of this series that we're doing is to provide webinars on hot button topics such as being an ally, microaggressions, cultural competency, and also building and retaining diverse teams. And of course, today's topic, navigating privilege in the workplace. The goal of these webinars is for us to all learn something new about the topic and leave the sessions better equipped to be able to take action in our personal and professional lives. This webinar series is being sponsored by the New Jersey YMCA State Alliance. We want to thank Darren Anderson, Teresa Williams, and the entire YMCA team for your support. This has been a great partnership, so thank you to all of you. Also, before I turn it over to our amazing moderator and panel, I'd like to give a special thanks to our Diversity and Inclusion Committee for PRSA New Jersey. We have Lanella Hooper-Williams, Deirdre Lopian, Keisha Dabrowski, and Stephanie Reed, as well as myself. I'd also like to thank our PRSA New Jersey President, Angelica Senna, as well as our Board of Directors. So thank you all so much for your support as we bring this valuable information, these webinars to the public. A few things to note, just some housekeeping things that I'd like to mention. One, everyone has been placed on mute by the host. If you have a question for the panelists, and please feel free to ask questions throughout, please use the Q&A box that you'll find at the bottom of the page. So again, you don't have to wait until the very end. You can ask any questions and put them in the Q&A, and we'll make sure that we try to get to as many as we possibly can. We will reserve about 10 to 15 minutes at the end of the discussion to answer any questions. And for those that we don't get a chance to answer today, again, because we are have some time constraints, and we'll make sure that we do address those at some point. Also, we wanted to note that this is a safe space for people to respectfully express their opinions and to have those opinions respected by others. So as you're chatting, please be mindful that, as you share your thoughts and comments, just being respectful for one another. And please note that as we're answering the questions that you all provide, this is not the end-all be-all, not the definitive set of Q&As on this topic of privilege. And so we're all coming to the conversation with different experiences, backgrounds, biases, and expectations. So what we do is we encourage you to take note of what you hear today, research additional solutions. We're actually going to be providing some resources at the end of the webinar as well, and then things that will align with you and your organization. So Deirdre, I'm going to turn it over to you, and thank you all again so very much for being here with us today.
Thank you, Jamia, and welcome everybody to the very first webinar for Courageous Conversations, Navigating Privilege in the Workplace. I want to thank you all for being here today, and I want to thank our panelists, which I'm going to introduce right now, and I'm going to start with Derek. Derek is the CEO and founder of the D Squared Group. For 16 years, Derek has been a trusted and reliable authority in branding and public relations, serving clients in the sports and entertainment industry with a special focus on the historically Black colleges and universities, brands, and events. His motivation is creating opportunities for the next generation via mentorships and internships not readily accessible to the BIPOC students, as well as using his story and experience as a source of inspiration, education, and empowerment for others. And up next, we have Candy Barone. Candy is the CEO of You Empowered Strong. She is a leadership development expert, trainer, and executive coach, as well as an international speaker and Amazon best-selling author. She is a catalyst and change agent who works with executives and emerging leaders to help bring heart back to leadership while feeding the soul of their business. with nearly 20 years in corporate combined with a bachelor's degree in mechanical engineering, and a certification as a Six Sigma Black Belt and MBA. She is a master at building exceptional high-performing teams and leveraging ROI, growing emerging leaders, creating metrics for greater accountability, and catapulting individuals to achieve explosive growth. Welcome, Candy. That was a little bit of a tongue twister there. And next up, we have Judith. Judith Mastilla is the Deputy Chief of Human Resources at NJ Transit. She is a senior level HR business partner with 20 years of HR expertise. She has earned a reputation as a trusted and strategic advisor to senior leadership for providing sound advice and management solutions based in industry best practices. Judith is passionate about coaching leaders on a variety of HR-related topics, especially the difficult conversations as they relate to diversity, equity, and inclusion. Welcome, Judith. All right. So today's conversation is probably one of the most polarizing topics in diversity and inclusion today. Ooh, Derek, you can unmute yourself. It's navigating privilege in the workplace. And so what we're going to do is, before we get into the panel discussion, we have a poll for our audience members. It's going to pop up on your screen. And if you could just take a minute to answer the questions, we would appreciate it. Okay, so today's webinar, we are going to be destigmatizing the word privilege by providing a deeper understanding of what it is and how it shows up in the workplace, and how those with privilege can create a more vital, diverse, equitable, and inclusive workspace. So I'm going to start off with the definition for privilege, and that is privilege is defined as a form of unearned power that is derived from sex, race, gender, abilities, and or socioeconomic standing, as well as other identities. So with that being said, we're actually going to break that down, and I am going to start with Candy. And Candy, can you start us off with breaking down the definition of the word privilege?
Yeah, when I think about, so first of all, thank you. I so appreciate being here, and just honored to be with the other panelists. I know we've had some great conversations around this to prep for this conversation. And so when we talk about privilege, we're really talking about a group of individuals that are at an advantage or able to have benefits due to the marginalization of another group. And so that other group might be based on color, might be based on gender, might be based on sexuality, might be based on a whole number of intersectional kind of cross ways that we take privilege. And one of the things that I really want to stress as we get into this conversation is that privilege is not this binary space of, okay, if you have privilege, you're bad. If you don't have privilege, first of all, there is no one in America right now that is not affected by some level of privilege. And so when we talk about that, it's oftentimes a function of what context, what space, what conversation, what group we're in, because I may have privilege in one group, but in another group, I may be actually marginalized or may be seen differently depending on what's going on in that situation or in that context. So when we can understand that privilege affects us all, and that privilege is a dynamic space that has a fluidity to it and also a spectrum, we can then start to develop the awareness and understanding that, okay, privilege is a real thing and it exists. And then we can really start to look at and investigate, what does that mean inside our workplace? And how does all of those stacking layers of privilege affect not only how we recruit and onboard, but how we're developing our people and how we're retaining talent in our organization as well.
I love it. I love that you even said it's not binary. It's not, and especially it's not good or bad, because we often see some pushback when we discuss privilege. Either we see people that don't believe in it. We see people that deny it and say, well, I worked my way through college, so, and I earned this position in this company, and I don't have privilege. So when we hear stuff like that, like Derek, how would you break that down for us when we hear?
When I think about it from that perspective, and thank you again, I'm honored to be here. I think about privilege from a place of power, authority, and influence, right? And so when you get that position, that you work so hard for, now you're in a position of power, authority, and influence within the space, especially the workspace that you're there. You have, direct reports or interns that may look up to you. And so at that point, there's a level of responsibility that comes with that access and that visibility. And it's how you use it that then determines, the power it has. Do you weaponize it for something, for self-preservation and your own needs? Or do you use it to raise others up and to call out injustices and things that you see that happen in the workplace that doesn't align with your values, right? And so I think when we look at it from that perspective, I look at it from a place of power. Like, we all have access to a very powerful tool. And I say that's a car, right? And when we go think about when we went to driver's ed, if my instructor used to remind me, like, this is a powerful tool. How you use it will determine safety. If your life is impacted, or you use it and you, God forbid, you hurt someone else. And so, we all have it at certain points, but it's recognizing it and then making sure that we're using it responsible for the better good.
Excellent. Yeah, I definitely agree with that. Judith, is there something that you wanted to add in as far as breaking it down, especially being in HR in the workplace, and how you see privilege for companies?
Yeah, so first, thank you for asking me to be a part of this panel. I really appreciate being part of this discussion. And to just echo the things that Candy and Derek have said, yes, it is about having that power, but also I see the privilege in the everyday employee as well, who doesn't recognize that they have the privilege.
Mm-hmm.
Right? And so there are those employees, innocently enough, making comments about projects that they were able to get on, project after project after project, that ability to have that visibility to leadership, not recognizing that that is a part of their privilege. Those are lots of those ways that people show up every day and use their own privilege when they speak to other employees who don't have that accessibility to the higher ups, to the C-suite. And they talk about all the opportunities that they've been presented, not recognizing how they're now a part of that cycle of employees, of people who continue to bring down those who are, marginalized. That I see that more often. It's happened to me in my own career. So it's definitely one piece of that larger puzzle of how privilege shows up in the workplace.
Mm-hmm. That's an excellent point. I thank you for sharing that. As far as misconceptions about privilege, Candy, how would you address that in the workplace if you were presented with a leader who they themselves didn't recognize their own privilege, but wanted to incorporate diversity, equity, and inclusion into their core values and mission statement and bring it into the workplace?
Yeah, so first of all, that's a really loaded question, and there's a lot to that, right? So I think first I want to preface to say that majority of people that are in any type of, first of all, actually I may back up and say leadership is ultimately a choice. We all have, regardless of title, function, role, responsibility, we all have an ability to lead in the gifts and talents that we have. So I want to preface that because I think sometimes when we talk about leadership, we think it's upper level or mid-level managers who are directing maybe culture or course of the organization, where yes, there's an aspect of that, and I want to hit that. There's also an aspect of each and every individual has an opportunity to lead. When we think about leadership being a function of how you choose to show up, how you choose to serve others, and how you choose to take personal responsibility. So that being said, when you ask that question, I think about most people. Now, I'm going to make a little bit of a generalized sweeping statement to say most people wake up wanting to do the best they can in any given moment. Most people who take leadership seriously, responsibly. They're trying to lift their people. Now, where that's gotten them maybe in spots where they don't recognize the privilege is the fact that we haven't given them the tools or the strategies to teach them what they need to actually develop people, develop emotional intelligence, to deal with people's outside experiences and traumas and triggers and all of that. So what happens is many times in organizations, there's a one size fits all if there's even a development strategy. So what happens is they're like, well, everybody on my team, it looks like this. If you fit a certain quadrant, then this is how I develop you. This is how I do this. And they're not taking time to lean into individuals. The other thing that I personally get a little charged by is companies that either say, now we've got initiatives and we're really going to focus on D&I, or they're talking about DE&I, which is diversity, equity, and inclusion. Yet here's the thing. Right now, it's the hot topic. Right now, people are checking the box and they're like, we're going to put all these resources into a whole team and function around DE&I. And they're not having the conversations that get open and vulnerable. They're not willing to step in and have awareness around where privilege exists and their own individual conscious and unconscious bias that play into privilege. And they think it's simply bringing in a D&I expert to do a training and bam, we did it, check the box, we're good.
Yeah.
This is a long unpacking, unwinding, stripping back, peeling back, getting into some very raw conversations that are going to require support and integration to not only deal with just the aspect of privilege, but also to deal with the trauma. And to what Derek said before, it's the mental and emotional wellness and intelligence. People have not been taught empathy skills or EQ skills. A lot of that's been pulled out. They haven't been taught how to really listen from their heart and listen for understanding. They haven't been taught how to step into vulnerability and deal with their own shame. All of that has to be considered, because for people to just say, hey, we're doing DEI initiatives, my head feels like it's going to roll off my shoulders, because I know what that means after spending 20 years in corporate. It's the hot topic right now, and it's going to be the bingo buzzword that everybody says, yet there's not going to be real meaningful traction that's required. And that means they've got to really take a look at what's happening in their culture, top down, ground up, and everywhere in the middle.
Yeah, to just double back on what Candy's saying, and it's exactly what happens, right? It's a yearly training that, you know, that
I agree with that wholeheartedly. This is, am I on a delay? Is somebody on a delay? My internet connection. Oh.
So I was saying, I'm sorry, Deirdre, it's a yearly check.
Okay. I think my internet connection got a little screwy.
And in between that, there's no change, right? There are the same cherry-picked folks for executive leadership, the same cherry-picked folks who get on the panels, the projects, the same cherry-picked folks who fast track through promotions. They all look alike, they all sound alike, and there's not much change. But every year, we're tasked to make sure that employees check the box and take this D&I training that doesn't really change from year to year.
And there's no accountability.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
No empathy, no accountability. You know.
Right. And I think if leaders, if they started to put those types of things in reviews, in part of your KPI, those key performance indicators that your organization, that's what bases, you know, you base your bonuses on, you base your increases on. If you really want to show some impact, you have to hit people where it hurts. And a lot of the time it's the pocket. And I think people will start to really take things seriously if they understand that they're really being looked at and they're really being scrutinized on how they're trying to broaden their horizons and broaden their workforce.
Yes, and that's absolutely going to happen with today's audience. They are under the microscope, and I'm glad you actually brought that up as well. Where it's going to, consumers are looking at them, and if you're promising, diversity and inclusion, and you're promising this to your employees, and you're putting out all of your, the black square on social media, or the allyship in June for our LGBTQ plus community, it doesn't just stop in June. You continue, it's, campaigns, brands blow up campaigns in June and send it out. And then you just see it stop. And I think that comes from not addressing the very basics of what diversity and inclusion is, and that is privilege, and identifying it and addressing it. Derek, I saw you shaking your head. My internet, everybody froze for a second, so I do apologize, and I apologize to the audiences. I froze, and so, but I saw you wanting to, did you want to add something?
Yeah, well, real quick, I wanted to add to something that Candy said about we have to look at it from no matter what our titles are and where we stand within an organization or outside of an organization, we all have that level of influence in the circles that we have, right? Our small group circles of friends and things of that nature. And so when we're talking about holding, companies and individuals accountable, we have to recognize that we do as individuals have that power to, and that privilege, right? That power, that authority, that influence to, that's why we vote, right? So it's all these other elements that when you break it down, when people sometimes may feel like I don't have the power, right? I don't feel like, I can make a difference. You start within your circles, and then you build the momentum from there. And so that's how we can hold these companies and these corporations accountable to say, okay, you said this, you're doing this, and even within the organizations from an employees, right? And so I think I talked about this with one of our preparations where we talk about looking at the company from the top and the bottom and how your employees are the foundation. And so what you want to do is you have to be vulnerable from both spaces. We have to be, from the leaders, have to be vulnerable enough to know that, hey, if I don't even know how to approach this conversation, let me be open to say, I don't know how to approach this conversation, but let's do this together as an organization, and be open and listening to what, your employees here are going through, and you meet and you come together in the middle, and you continue to do the work, and you apply pressure to in the middle of the culture, right? And really pushing to try to change that dynamic, but it happens together.
Can I add something else to that real quick? Simply because I saw a comment in the chat, and Derek, you just hit on something that I know we were talking about yesterday, and I want to make sure we bring through. There's this space of conversation around unconscious and conscious bias as well. And I think too many times we assume it's an unconscious bias. While that is true for some people, and to Judith's point earlier, the idea that, some of us are innocent in how we are showing up individually based on what we've been taught, based on the culture that's around us. And so there is an education, there is that unconscious bias. There's also a conscious bias where there are individuals that are very clear about their privilege. And this is part of what is really important if we're going to talk about how to address privilege and change the behavior. Those people that we've forever been like, that's just Tom, and no offense to Tom's on the call right now. I'm just saying that when we excuse someone because they're a 30-year veteran, or they're our top salesperson, or they're whatever they might be, and we say, well, that's just them, we don't pay attention. You are dismantling every sense of momentum and movement, because I'm going to tell you right now, that person is very clear what their privilege is. That person is using that privilege to weaponize and continue to marginalize, thereby positioning, influencing, and promoting themselves above everyone else. And I had leaders that asked me once that said, so what happens if we let go of Tom? He's our best salesperson. My response was, what if you had 6 other people that would be better if they only had opportunity to rise? And if you are not ready to let go of your sacred cows in your organization, this conversation is already over. And that for me is such a hot button. And I had to address that because Derek, you opened that up, that space, because I think that is one of the biggest issues why people are not getting traction in D&I or DE&I spaces, because they're not willing to look at their sacred cows and say that there is a zero tolerance policy across the board.
They'll say it on paper. We see this a lot on paper, and they'll put it out on a social media post. But in actuality, that is not what is happening in organizations. And actually, so Judith, I'm going to direct this to you, is how do we bring up, you know, that's just Tom and that's just Bob. And I've been in those situations so many times where, you know, we don't want to hold them accountable because either they've been there so long and the, you know, and, or their sales reputation or however, you know, spectacular they do their job. But, you know, if we move forward, we're going to have to address this. So how does this happen? How do we bring that conversation, that uncomfortable conversation to the table?
So it's not easy, but with anything with change management, that really has to start at the top. There has to be that commitment from the C-suite, from your leaders that says no more.
Mm-hmm.
And when we see it, we're going to call it out and we're going to get rid of it. And so if that means that 30-year vet Tom, who's brought in, you know, this book of business for many years, but Tom is vile.
Yeah.
Tom is, you know, alienating women and gays and people of Tom has to go.
Tom's
Because
marginalizing marginalized groups.
Yeah, and because what will happen is when Tom does it over and over and over again, and everyone sees it, and no one does anything about it, Tom stays, but everyone else leaves.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So how do we think about, like, I'm thinking of even like the entry-level employee who sees this right away, because we are a very aware group
Mm-hmm.
now. And so they're nervous about, and I'm going to direct this to all of you because I just don't want to put you on the spot, but you came in there with the HR background. But think of like the entry-level employee. They're coming in and they see Tom right away and they call it out and then they get the that's just Tom. But then they're seeing on paper, you know, we are a diverse and inclusive organization. And you're like, you can't say it on paper. So how do we address, how does somebody that is new or shy or has their own marginalizations, has their own identities that are being oppressed within the organization bring this?
So Candy brought up onboarding, right? And when you're bringing these, you know, bringing on a new employee, they need to have that safe space. That comes from their direct line of supervision. Mm-hmm. Their direct line of supervision, unless it is Tom, then we know he's not providing that. But they need to be able to say, when you see something, say something.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
You know, there's, you know, most companies have resource groups that employees can go out to anonymously or not to bring up these types of issues. But what happens is when that person brings it up, it needs to be remedied quickly.
Yeah.
They need to see that some action has been taken. Because if Tom is moved from marketing to sales, you sweep the, you know, the garbage from the kitchen into the living room, that's not going to change anything. So, yeah. You know, there needs to be that level of each ladder in the ring, right? Each ring on the ladder where somebody can escalate when they see the Toms, you know, right away.
Yeah. I used to work in my first job out of college. I was that entry level employee, and I was the only, you know, Black person in the agency, only Black male in period. And then, you know, over time, you know, childhood wise, I was in kindergarten, I was the only Black person in class. So it really wasn't that odd for me, but, you know, we see things differently from a child, and as an adult, we're aware of a lot more things. And so, you know, going through, you know, my career, as I, you know, was able to gain traction and get promotions and things of that nature, I start to see the dynamic of what was at play. And a lot of it came from the top down. You know, when I first started there, they had an HR director, and then she got laid off because of the recession. And then they never hired one back. And so when we talk about creating safe spaces, there's some atmospheres where those really don't exist, because everyone is supporting the CEO, who is the one that's filtering all this negativity and toxicity down through the culture and the fabric of, you know, the organization. And we talked about this the other day about, you know, when you think about steak, you know, when you marinate a steak, you can't take the marinade out of the steak once you've marinated it. You have to break it down and start over. And so in some organizations like the one I'm in, it is still doing the same thing it was doing when I left over about 6 years ago. I have a friend who still works there, who actually came in. He's a Black young man. He came in right when I left. And what I tried to do, I know we're talking about privilege. What I tried to do as I saw myself rising up and getting access, right, to power, authority, influence, I started seeing the opportunities that I could make a difference. And so I started recruiting, students of color. I started, mentoring those interns to make sure that they get the that experience, because I wasn't seeing that while I was there. And so when I left, he texted me not too long ago and he said, "Hey, was this like this when you were here?" Because this was right around the time when the riots were taking place and all the other stuff. Well, the protests were taking place, excuse me, and all the things. And then so they asked him to be on a diversity and inclusion committee that they just created because of the situation that was taking place. And, they gave this big statement about what they've been done in the past. And he was like, "Have they actually done this?" And I was like, "Well, no, half of that stuff I did when I was there, but I felt like I had to protect him, and I felt bad that I didn't have a conversation with him before I left on how to navigate these waters, because no one else was going to have it with him." And so I think, a part of that influence, right, when we can do something to help people navigate and guide, and it's unfortunate we have to do that within an organization where we have to have these side conversations with people of color or women about how to navigate these situations and what to look out for here and how to play the game, so to speak, which is terrible. But when there's no safe space, because there's no HR, there's no accountability, is very hard. And so I think, creating those safe spaces, for me, if we had that safe space, I would have stood up and said more things and addressed more things. But I felt, the repercussions of saying something. I would lose my job or something, because it wasn't enough of me and it wasn't enough support. So I just wanted to share that note, but yes.
Well, and Derek, to your point, this is where, if you know and recognize the privilege you have. So for your example, being the only Black person in an organization, your level of privilege is going to be very different than someone like me who's white, who knows and sees a problem. That means then I have a responsibility to bring awareness to the higher ups that are the leaders of the leaders. And when you think about the C-suite, and I remember I did a training once for a group of transitioning C-level executives in Dallas. Mm-hmm. And the COO just jumped in at the end of he's like, "I'm just going to say, I hear you, Candy, the last organization I worked at, the culture was so bad, blah, blah, blah." And I let him vent. And then when he was done, I looked at him and I go, "Shame on you." And he was like, "Excuse me?" And I said, "You're the chief operating officer. Guess where culture starts?" And I said, "I am not going to allow you to sit in this room and be like, 'Oh, woe is me, I was part of a really crappy culture,' when you are the chief operating officer. And if you saw that you chose to do nothing, that I said, I hope this transition period is going to help you take time to look in the mirror so that you choose to show up differently the next time you lead." And the thing is when you have that privilege and you understand it, and it could be somebody that's just, I don't care what your role is, you write a letter up to the chain of command. You go in and say, "Look, I'm seeing this." Because when people of privilege don't speak up, because this is the opportunity. Privilege is neither, again, not binary. It is a thing. It exists. So how are you leveraging and using that privilege, that influence, that power to make sure that your company doesn't have the no see, no tell? Behind because they speak, they do this, but it's the passive aggressive, "Oh, we'll have a conversation in the hallway, but God forbid we address the big ugly elephant in the room that's happening right now." Because that's just too, you know what, I'm not going to risk that. People with privilege need to take that risk.
And actually, to that point is going to lead into my next question and topic area that I want to discuss is, when you research privilege and you look for content on it and resources, a lot of the content that we see and a lot of the resources have a lot of finger pointing to the white, heterosexual, cisgender male. And I think with that is we know that is the privileged of, but they want a seat at the table. But when they see this finger pointing and they see this negativity, it's like, well, I don't know where to lend my voice. And I know I have this privilege and I own it. And how do I, bring it and use it to help somebody? And how can we let them know? How can we help them find a place at the table and to make some actual change?
I have an example. When I was, before I left the company that I was at, over time, you gain the knowledge, right? You start to see things. And so there were times where I had to stand up for myself, where me and a colleague, we were the exact same position title. And my boss and her boss was like, well, Derek can come and help out on this account, right? He can help out 10% because this is his area of expertise. And so we didn't have a conversation, but the next thing I know, I get an email that says, hey, well, can you email blast this media list? Can you make these phone calls? And I'm looking like, well, we're both senior executives. Like, this is intern work. We didn't have a conversation about how I can support you. So it's automatically assumed that, oh, I'm just going to give you whatever busy work. I don't respect your level. And so when I brought it to my boss, and I sent the email, I prayed about it, right? I talked to my influencers outside of work, right? People that you get, inspiration from and things of that nature. And I sent an email, I copied her boss, my boss, and I laid it out, and I said, I'm willing to help, but we both were working the number 1 and 2 clients in the company. So my schedule was just as busy as hers, but I didn't mind helping, but respect my time just like I'm respecting yours. And so he came to bat and he supported that. And he said, yes, and this is exactly right, Derek, And so at that point, that was like one of the first times I've ever felt supported within that atmosphere, because he finally said something, stood up and validated what I was feeling, because sometimes you can feel like, am I going crazy? Am I the only one? Is this just me? Because, someone said, oh no, you're overthinking it, right? Those, I don't know if those are the microaggressions that pop up, but, oh, you're just overthinking that, or you're thinking too deeply about it. But it was at that point where I knew that what I was thinking and feeling was valid, and I saw it, and then it was just like, okay, perfect. And so I think standing up and in those moments of, those small moments, they make a difference. They truly do make a difference. But then on the flip side, you still have to continue to be consistent with it, because when I needed him again later on, he wouldn't stand up to the CEO because of fear of something that I asked for. Because, again, when you bring value to a company, you think that you're valued truly. And so, one thing that I asked for was to work from home, right? And which is very odd right now, because we're all working from home. We're all working from home. But I asked to work from home, I think one or 2 days a week, because I was finishing up my MBA, and he didn't even ask. Oh, he'll say no. You didn't even go to bat for me. You didn't even try. And I think those are the things where we're just like, just try, just show some effort, some input that you care. And I think that's really where it comes. If you have a heart, if you have empathy, just care enough to say something. And I always say, flip it around. What would you say to your best friend if he was in that situation or she was in that situation, right? Flip it around to someone that you know, and then ask the same question of how you would support and how you would step up.
Did you want to add anything to that with the?
Yeah, I think it's not just, because I've known a lot of, good leaders and throughout my travels, and it brings the empathy in the office as well, because they'll have plenty of empathy for those in their circle, but not enough for those that work for them. Mm-hmm. And it's not a switch that you should be able to turn off and on, right? You should be able to support, encourage, and influence those that work for you. And I think that, a lot of those leaders who are looking for the seat at the table already have that seat. Mm-hmm. So it's really just speaking up and having the courage to do that. Mm-hmm.
Yes.
I think that's the first step. They have to speak up. They have to want to care. They have to want to care, and they have to speak up.
Well,
I left after that.
Go ahead.
I had my letter of resignation ready, because I already knew if I didn't have your support then it was no need for me to stay. And you lost a top talent. And like we talked about earlier, you lose talent when you don't support and you show that empathy. And, I had my answer right then and there. Actions speak louder. But I'm sorry, Candy, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say there's also a level of humility, right? I think people tend to get so defensive when they hear the words privilege, or they hear the words racism, or they hear the words whatever it is, right? And the thing is in order for us to really flex an empathy muscle, and I love the way Michelle Obama said it the other night, right? It's not about just what we feel, it's feeling and action. Mm-hmm. And so I think about the fact that if we're going to do this work, there needs to be a level of humility and empathy that we're exercising that says, I'm listening to see where I can improve, not where I can be defensive. And what happens is people immediately shut down instead of genuinely dropping into gratitude to say, wow, Thank you for bringing that to my attention. I don't know if I agree with all of it. However, I'm going to choose to sit and see what aspects of that are true for me. Even just, or starting the conversation, and I love what Brene Brown talks about a lot, starting the conversation and say, look, I don't know how to do this conversation. I just know that not having this conversation is not an option. And because when you think about, and we go back to the definition of privilege, and I love the way that she says this, you're uncomfortable and you choosing to be comfortable over the conversation that needs to happen is the very definition of entitlement and privilege. So when you make your comfort more important than my safety and my ability to be seen, you are right there telling me that you are choosing privilege and entitlement over leading in this space. When we can show up and have that humility to say, thank you for being honest with me. I got to tell you, I'm a little triggered right now. And that's on me to work through. And I appreciate, there are so many ways to lean into those difficult conversations, yet right away, we're like, oh, you're attacking me.
Yeah, it goes right to that. Right to that.
And they shut it down. We cannot. We need to come from a place of extreme vulnerability, humility, and gratitude if we're going to be open to understand our conscious and unconscious bias in this space.
Yes, I agree.
Yeah, and and this is the part of, as the moderator, that I'm like, I hate, because it's 12:45 and I want to be cognizant of people's time. We did say the webinar would end at 1, and we do want to open the floor for Q&A. And my colleague Lynella has somewhere to be at 1. She's going to drop off, and I can't have her leave without us finishing and seeing everything. So I do have some questions from the audience. You can drop it in, just so the audience members know, you can drop a question into our chat, and it is anonymous. So you can, and I will try to get to as many as I can here. So this is one of the questions, what is the best way to connect with people of color who are looking for internships or jobs? Yeah, so what is the best way to connect with oh, okay. See, I think they're looking for resources. If individual. It took me a second. I'm sorry. Need more coffee. So they're looking for resources for anybody, BIPOC individuals and executives looking for jobs. Is there a specific resource that a company or small business or entrepreneur can go to?
I would say definitely start with your HBCUs. Right. Great pools of talent. And those are going to be your immediate hotbeds for, people of color, Black, brown, and so that talent, there's a lot of top talent there. So I would start there. So if you maybe, depending on where you are, search HBCUs in your community. If not, then there's one that I really, I haven't thought about, but then there's organizations on other campuses that target Black students, minority students on campus that are also looking for those type of internships. So, HBCUs are a good choice, but then also contacting local campuses to look at what, organizations and programs are specifically supporting students of color and their job pursuits.
And I just want to clarify, HBCUs are historically Black colleges, universities. We're using our jargon here.
I know, right?
For our audience. Jimmy, I saw you pop up. How are you?
Good. Hello again, everyone. This has been amazing. Thank you all so very much. Perfect. So I did see a question that came in as well. So this one was, what do we do in our organizations to make sure D&I is a movement and not just a moment?
There we go.
Love it.
Judith, we'll start with you.
Oh, I think one of the things that, to make sure that it is a movement is to talk about those hot topics, right? To talk about the things that happen as they're happening and to have that space for the real discussion. And yes, the trainings are important, but I think having moderators come in and have those really challenging conversations where people of all backgrounds could sit down and in a safe space, talk about their experiences. I think that's when we learn, right? And how
your eyes peek up, and I feel like I know where you're going with this. I feel like you wanted to add something, and did you want to, Candy, I'm talking to you.
Oh, yeah.
I saw your eyes pick up when she was.
I was just so into what Judith was saying. I
Yeah.
was like, what? You're calling on me. I agree, because the thing that's missing, and I've been doing a lot of Reshma Menaken's work around trauma in, the black body, the white body, police bodies. And I think we can do all the training we want and all the check the box exercises in organizations. If we are not being very cognizant around what we are carrying individually and collectively in our bodies as trauma, we will not be able to eradicate what is happening from a privileged perspective, from a racism perspective, from any other kind of marginalization of any group or minority in any capacity. Because for each of us, there is so much we are carrying through our experiences, through generational legacies, through conditioning, through whatever stories, whatever it might be, that we have to learn the skills on how to effectively unpack. And unpack is not unload. And I talk to a lot of my people about unloading is not just vomiting out. Unpacking is a very clear responsibility to be able to sit with and do the work required to help heal the trauma that we all are carrying as a result of what this means for us in our organizations, in our country, in our families. We have got to embrace the fact that emotional intelligence, mental intelligence, that support is not an option. It needs to be a non-negotiable that is woven into every fabric of the culture, from the bottom up, down, top down, and it needs to be something that is a top priority above bringing revenue in the door, in my opinion. Because the only way you shift things is to start to bring in the humanity side of and the healing side of what needs to be opened up. And that scares the daylights out of most people, because that means they got to get really open, raw, and vulnerable. And that you've got to equip people with how to have those conversations.
And if you don't have those resources in your organization to help with the unpacking, to help have those conversations, find those resources out.
I was going to go to you with that, Judith, because we did talk about this yesterday, and that was, whether it should be done internally, whether these, organizations, whether DEI work should be done internally or bring in an outside consultant.
I mean, it's depending on those things, right? You would need someone who is equipped, who has that skill set, to come in and be able to facilitate such a discussion. And and to be able to keep people on track, where it isn't necessarily a blame game, but being able to say, this is how what you've done, it has impacted me. And how we move forward from that.
Yes, yes.
I have another question. Derek, this one is for you. It says, to Derek's situation about going to his boss a second time, could you please talk about being an ally and a support, maybe a white ally in the workplace when someone else speaks up? How?
And Deirdre's funny, Deirdre, so quickly, I was going to mention that. I saw that one, but I was going to lead into our next webinar. I didn't know if you were going to save it to, follow on about being an ally, obviously.
And I can talk about it from a privileged perspective, and then you can lead it on to that's what the conversation will be in the next and in the next moderation panel. But I look at it from a place of standing up and showing your support, right? So for me, it's like when we talked about it earlier, see something, say something, right? Well, a lot of times it's like, oh, I don't want to say anything. Someone else will say something. Well, that someone else never comes because that someone was you. And so no one ever says anything and nothing ever gets done. And that person, like myself, you feel, isolated. You don't feel comfortable. You don't feel like you have any support. So therefore you shut down and you just have your head down and you come to work and you go home. Right. And so I think for me, for the allies that I do have in my life and over the course of my career has been those spaces where they have been open to having dialogue with me. And it's a learning process on both sides, right? Me learning to trust again. To trust, white counterparts who, and not let the trauma or the experience of past relationships with, former bosses deter me from opening up and being open to, learning something new and having that relationship as well. And so, you have to meet halfway. I still have to take a step forward in order for that ally to feel like they can actually be of support. But even if I never say anything, you should still say something, irregardless regardless of, if this person moves forward closer to you or not. And so for me, that's what was consistent. Like, we've had conversations. They would be vulnerable enough to say, you know what, Derek, I don't understand this. Like, what is this? What are HBCUs? Like, literally, I had that happen with a colleague that we worked together on many projects around HBCUs, and she never really understood. And so she asked me, and I was like, oh, you don't know? And we just had a dialogue, and she was like, wow, I didn't understand the Divine Nine. What is that? But it's being open and asking questions and doing it from a sincere place, but then taking what you learn and applying it and not forgetting it, right? Because again, it goes back to your action. So if you go through this process to say you're an ally and you're going to be supportive, but then in the next moment, you're, talking smack about another person of color, or you're doing something else, it doesn't align. And so when we think about our character, what do you want your character to be? And then be that, right? And then be that consistently in work, out of work. So.
And Jamia, we'll do the promotion for the, because it.
Yeah, no, when you mentioned it, I was like, I saw it, I said, oh, it's spot on, right in line with our next one. So yeah, I didn't know if you were going to mention, when you said it, I was like, oh. But someone did ask a question, and I'm going to kind of put a couple of questions together. So someone wanted to know, as communicators and even non-communicators, because of course we're doing this with PRSA New Jersey, but we also have the YMCA State Alliance that's doing this with us as well. And so people are wondering, what can they do specifically within their work areas and specifically within the YMCA? Of course, when you have this big state alliance throughout the entire state of New Jersey, what can be done, to help people actually put these things into action, all this great information that you all share with us, to really start to move the needle? And someone also kind of threw another thing in there that said, and then what happens when the C-suite people are not on board with it, or they may not want to recognize privilege and they think everything is okay? So, what can people do, not only top down, but bottom up as well, to really help make a difference?
Can I offer something for that? Two things real quick, only because this just recently came up. One is, I think people need to go back to what Derek said, work within their circles of influence. So they need to start having the conversation and truthfully saying, look, I don't know how to have this conversation, but we're going to talk about privilege in our environment right now, and we're going to open up conversations to start to unpack that. The other thing I will tell you is there is power in numbers. If your executive team, and I just saw this with an organization, they are now moving the CEO out because he chose not to speak up for Black Lives Matter with what just recently happened. And 2,000 employees came together and petitioned and said, absolutely not. This is not who we are. We no longer want the CEO running this organization. And the board is moving him out because he chose silence. Well, and the people spoke up and said, that is not what you preach. That is not our culture. When you choose to not, we're going to choose to then voice, we're either going to leave, all 2,000 of us, or you're going to change who's in the seat driving the ship. And that's the power of the vote, the power of the voice. When you collectively bring those people together, you can change the direction of the way the C-level suite is driving that.
Absolutely, absolutely. Because the C-level suite, they're thinking about their bottom line. They're thinking about their brand. And social media has been so impactful in the last years of bringing justice to small cases around the country, bringing light to these injustices that are happening, these microaggressions that are happening in our own communities. And if it's doing that in Montclair, New Jersey, it will do that for your company. Mm-hmm. So if the C-suite, they're not paying attention, believe me, people on social media, they're paying attention. Mm-hmm. And they'll bring the heat that the CEO wouldn't bring.
They'll take away the money.
Absolutely.
Mm-hmm. Right in the pockets. And then
awesome.
Jimmy, were there any more questions that I see the chat has gotten very busy. Were there any questions that I missed?
Let's see. Yes, there are quite a few questions that came in, like I said, and if we don't get to them, we'll make sure that we do it at some point. So there was one that someone mentioned. They said that they work with people with disabilities, and so they just wanted to, just mention that bringing that into discussions as well would be really good, because they do work with that population. And then also someone asked the question, how do you explain to people the difference between equity and equality in DEI programs, and how important is the equity piece versus programs only being diverse and inclusive.
Wow.
You don't get equality without equity. Let's just put it that way. You cannot get equality without equity. And equity means you're providing the same level of resources and opportunities for all, which may look different because people come from different experiences. So someone from a Black, poor neighborhood who didn't have resources but has the capacity, aptitude, may mean you need to lift them up differently, but you're affording the resources to lift everybody up so that the starting line looks the same. But in my opinion, equality, you can't even have a conversation about equality until equity becomes something that we understand and start to implement.
Yeah, exactly. And then when you talk about inclusion, right, diversity is the makeup, right? So it's not just, let me just get one Black person and one white person, but you got to think about within our races, within, the Black community, the white community, there's varying, perspectives, right? Different viewpoints and things of that nature. And so, you have to look at it, like you said earlier, Candy, there's a wide spectrum here. It's not just one thing and one pick. And then when you add the equity and then you add the inclusion, it's like, are you truly want to hear my voice? Do you truly want me at the table? And what does that look like, right? You can't say that you're going to shove all this money out here for all these organizations, but you haven't fixed the social injustice that's happening in your own organization that looks backwards. So you have to fix it in-house first. And how you do it is really make sure that your organization is representative of the things that you say that you are standing for: diversity, true diversity, equity, and inclusion. So.
And with that, I have to say, this is like, I hate ending this because it's really just the tip of the iceberg when we talk about privilege. Because again, it's more than just race, it's gender, it's sexuality, it's gender identity, it's abilities. I mean, the list goes on. And making sure that, we need to start bringing everybody to the table and giving them their voice. And I know our audience wants more, I want more, but I do want to say our next event is going to be on September 17th, and Jamia will be moderating it. And it is Courageous Conversations. What does it mean to be an ally? So she is going to break that down for us. It is, you can mark your calendars. It's September 17th at 12 p.m. And the registration will be up. Everybody who has signed up for this will be getting an email. It's also going to be up on PRSANJ.org to sign up for it. And so I really want to thank our audience for attending. I definitely want to thank our panelists, Candy, Derek, Judy. It's been just, again, we can sit here and talk for hours. Everybody that signed up will be getting also an email with the replay for this. And I want to thank the YMCA for sponsoring this entire series and being a partner, a true partner with this entire series. And I don't know, did I forget anything, Jamia? I feel like.
No, you did mention the post-webinar survey that's coming. You did mention that.
I did not mention that.
Okay, yep. So we will send out a survey just to make sure that we get everyone's feedback so we can see how we can improve on the next ones. Deirdre kept saying, she had to go first. So of course, there's a lot of pressure there. But what we want to do, this was amazing. We want to take all the key learnings and just continue to improve and bring great programming to the community. So thank you again, Deirdre, amazing job. Candy, Judy, thank you all so much. The YMCA, we are truly grateful. And to all the attendees, we truly appreciate you taking time to attend us today.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.